Okay, today I want to go over my typography lab for the interface design class. And so there's a lot of typography ideas inside of interface design. And so I do have a lab. It's called Typography and Interface Design. And there is a Word document. So let's open up that Word document first so we can get... And so mostly... the purpose of this lab is really just to practice, but to learn the concepts and understand important interface design typography. Of course, probably the largest issue, of course, with typography is whatever device you're running your interface on, does it have the font that is needed to display what the designer has made? Of course, we all know that websites cannot display just any old font that you have on your computer. The fonts either need to be downloaded or on the system itself. One way to avoid all the font problems that we've had in the past was, of course, to use Acrobat. And, of course, Acrobat, and the reason why we use Adobe Acrobat is so that we could design a page with certain fonts on it, and anybody can view it, and it's going to look great with the fonts that we choose, because you don't really need to have the font on the system for an Acrobat file. If I was going to hand code a website, of course, you really need to use fonts that are downloadable, or like I said, or convert the fonts into objects. So that's sort of what I'm going to talk a little bit about too. I'm going to talk a little bit about, okay, if I'm going to use this crazy font that I downloaded, what can I do to put it on my website? So we're going to kind of talk about things like that in this lesson. So the first thing I want you to know is, of course, how to do web fonts. If you're new to web design and you haven't taken any HTML type of classes before, you can't just use any old font. You have to mostly program fonts. And so to program fonts, there's two sort of most common ways of doing it. One is with Google Fonts. So if you click on the link here, it says Google Fonts. You can see these are Google Fonts. And if you say, oh, I want to use these on my website or anything like a website, I guess you could put it in an app. I'm not sure. I haven't really thought about that. But let's say we wanted to use this font here. If I click on it in the Google Fonts, you can then go down to the very bottom of the thing, and you could tell it what kind of fonts you want. Do I want all of them? You could select a certain style. Do I want bold 600, regular Italian, italic 400 here? You could select them. And then when you're all done doing that, you'll get some code that says embed right here. And then you'll copy this code and put it into your website and your CSS. And then you'll be able to see that font properly on a website. So, it's so much easier today being able to do this than what we had to go through 10 years ago or 15 years ago in web design. Google's made it much easier. I tend to use Google Fonts, but you might want to consider, again, the other one, and I'm not going to use this one. The other one is the Adobe Typekit, and if you click on there, it does talk about how you can use Adobe Typekit. Now, I usually don't use Adobe Typekit for web fonts. The first time using web fonts, they have some information about it. I tend to use the Google Fonts if I'm doing hand coding programming for a website. So I just wanted to point those out. You should read about them and understand the difference between how to embed fonts. If you take the HTML class or the web design class, you'll learn a little bit more about how to embed fonts in a website. Sorry, I had to drink water. Next is the app design. If I'm designing an app for iOS or Apple, most likely I'm going to use an Apple type of font. They have specific fonts, and they call them scalable or dynamic fonts, in that they scale properly depending upon the device that you're using, right? Some people have iPhones or iPads, small screen, medium screen, you got the big screen, and so on. So what Apple has designed is a specific font for dynamic, and that's called San Francisco, is their sans serif one. So if you click on there, you'll see that there is a sans serif font called San Francisco that we use for Xcode as the software I use to build apps. I tend to use the default here for San Francisco, and if you take the app design class, we'll learn why we use this and what is a dynamic font here. They do also offer a sans serif one for the app or iOS. That is called New York. And so it's very similar to how San Francisco works, but it's the serif version of the font. Again, those are the two you would primarily use for app design on Apple. Then, of course, they do have their guidelines for using typography on an Apple device, and I have a link here for that. And I recommend reading how that and why you should use the default fonts or dynamic fonts. And again, you could read about that from the link here. Very useful, and they talk about how to use the specific sizes as well. Next, of course, we don't all live in Apple's world. I know everybody would love to just live in an Apple world probably, but we do have Android, and Android is the apps that we would use on a Google device or Android operating system. And of course, Apple's or Android's specific font is called the default is Roboto. And so if we click on the Roboto, you can see the Roboto font is a default usually on a Android device. So those are kind of the most important things you should know about typography as far as app design. Your San Francisco, your New York, and your Roboto for Android. In addition, I do have some links about more fonts. You should know, and we have a whole typography class, so I'm not going into a lot of detail about typography in this class. We're going to use a lot of type in our designs, but you should know the difference between true type and open type, or not necessarily the difference, but they are the types of fonts. And what I mean by fonts, that's the format. True type came out several years ago. From the problems that the early fonts had with scalability. Or the early fonts were called Type 1 fonts, and they have some reading here. And there were some downfalls with the Type 1 fonts in that it couldn't scale properly. And so Adobe developed a True Type font, and that would be a font that's able to scale on almost any device. There was some downfalls of it as far as kerning and different ways that the letters didn't render properly. But it's still useful, and we still find true type fonts today, and we might look at some today. The next one, of course, is the newer version called OpenType, and OpenType was made by Microsoft, of all things. But Adobe still uses OpenType. They contribute to the OpenType, so OpenType is another way of rendering, and you can use OpenType on Mac and Windows as well. So those are the two types of fonts that you might find that you could use. And so one of the things is that, of course, they're all great to have all these fonts on your computer, but a lot of times they're kind of boring, and if you want to use specific and more interesting fonts, you're going to have to download some. So that's what we're going to go over right now. We'll go over how to download some fonts and use them in a design, and then we'll talk a little bit more about how to convert the text into an object that I could use on a website or in an app. So let's first look at, we're going to make something that looks like Fluffy here is missing, basically a cat or a dog or whatever kind of animal you want. Type of flyer. And the whole purpose of this, of course, is I want you to make sure you know how to download a font and install it on your computer and use it in a design. So these little fluffy cats here are actually some dingbats that you could get, basically shapes in the font suitcase, and then of course this interesting font here. So let's start. We're going to start by downloading some fonts. One thing to keep in mind, if you are downloading fonts and installing them on your computer, you shouldn't have any applications running, because if you have an application running, like right now I have Photoshop running, and I try and install a font, it's not going to be available to me until I quit the program and restart the program. So I'm going to quit all those programs, and let's go to the website dafont.com. Oops, let me find it up here. dafont.com. Okay, so this is a great place to download fonts. Again, one of the things about these fonts that you have on this website is that they are copyrighted and made by somebody. So as you're downloading and using fonts, you might need to see the copyright information over here. A lot of them say free for personal use, or there's a open for any use you want. So just be careful what you're doing. So of course we're doing pets, so let's put in pets. How about that? So you can search. There we go, pets. I've already searched for pets here. Pets. And you can see you can come up with certain fonts. So you can search over here. There is a search box in the dafont.com. When you download a font from this website, and this is the one I downloaded earlier, again, most of them are going to be zipped or compressed. Once you uncompress them, they'll then be either a true type font or the open type font that we looked at before. Let's see if we can find any cool fonts. Oh, this is the 3D animals I downloaded earlier. Let me get some new things here. Oh, I do like this one with the paws on it. That's kind of interesting. Oh, these animals are kind of cool as well. Maybe we'll use one of these. So I'm going to download. If you see over here, you want to do the paws? Yeah, let's do some. Let's see if there's anything else. I do kind of like these paws right here. I'm going to download those. 100% free. Look at that. So I can use that anywhere I want. So if I hit the download button here, it's going to ask me what do you want to do. Now, of course, it's a zip file, so you can either save it on your computer and then uncompress it and then install it, or you could just say automatically open with the archive utility. One thing to keep in mind is this is kind of open source, or not open source, but this is an open website that anybody can contribute, and so, you know, you could get a virus from this, so you might want to run anything you download from this through a virus protection. I'm just pointing it out. Most likely you should be okay with the files here. I'm going to open this on the archive utility here, and it's going to open it up, and then it goes to my downloads folder, and it gives me a folder right here of the font. And if I open that up, you'll see it gives me a PDF that maybe explains some information. But one of the things to look for is the extension, and if you'll notice, this extension right here on this file is TTF, which stands for True Type Font. So this is a font I can use on my computer. If I double click on this TTF file, it's going to ask me to install, and so if I click on that and say install font, it's going to go and put it in my font suitcase. Now I can take advantage of this inside of Photoshop, Illustrator, or something like that, or of course Microsoft Word. So that was one. Let's go download another one. If you're using Windows, one of the things I've done in the past, and I haven't used a Windows system to install fonts in a while, but what I would do is I would download the font and find the TTF or the open type file, and then usually there's a folder in the system file for Windows, and I just drag the font into that folder and it'll install it. So I can't really show you Windows at this point, but there is a way to install on Windows as well. Let's try another one. See if we can find any other animal type things. These ones are kind of cool. Do I have a dog? I need a dog one. Some Egyptian hieroglyphs. There you go. No, there's not some very good pet ones. Oh, here's some dogs here. Is that a dog? I think it's a dog. Okay, I'm going to download this one and open that one. And then, there it is. TTF right there. True Type Font. And install that. Hold on, we got some protesting going on outside. Okay, so again, if you just double click on a TTF, it should install. There's not too many animals in this last one I did. But let's look at how we could use some of these fonts. Again, make sure your software was not running. So I'm going to go and close this website here. And I'm going to go to Illustrator. So the reason why I'm going to use Illustrator is if I'm going to use this font on a website, I'm going to need to format it properly so that it'll work. Now, I could use it as a bitmap inside of a website, no problem, but let's just learn about different formats here, and we're going to use Illustrator to describe that. So all I'm going to do is use Adobe Illustrator for this example right now, and to do that I'm just going to make a new file by going under File, New. And I'm not worried about size. I'm just going to do letter size. Make sure I use RGB for the color system and hit Create. And so I got a nice sort of blank document here, and all I'm doing is I'm not making shapes. I'm not doing anything. You don't need to learn how to draw in Illustrator. I know we have a whole Illustrator class, but what I'm doing is type here, typography. So I'm going to use the type tool here. And let's just say I wanted to use that pause font. Remember the pause font? And I'm going to put my dog's name on let's say my website or in an app. So to do that, I'm going to type in there, and before I do that, I'm going to go to the character option. If you do not see, so I clicked with the type tool onto the screen, and let's say my dog's name is Fido. No, I couldn't spell Fido. Let's say a dog. What's a dog's name? Typical dog. Scruffy. Scruffy? Scruff. S-C-R-U-F-F-Y? Scruff? There's no R in there. Is it Scruffy? No, Scruff. C-R. No. We're going to go with the Scruffy. S-C-R-U-F-F-Y. We're going to do it anyways. That's the name of my dog. So I type in some text, and I'm going to go to my character option. If you do not see character option side of Illustrator, you go under Window, Character, or Type Character. And in the character option, we could change the font. Again, I'm going to use my new one that I got, the ones with the pause. I forget the name of that one, so I'm going to have to scroll around and look for it. Maybe I... I guess I can use my old font. I don't know what happens to the pause. Oh, here they are. They're Scruffy. So here's my pause. Maybe I'll make it a little bit bigger. To change the size, you do have a size option here inside of the character window, and I can change it to a bigger size here. So let's go all the way up to 60. There we go. Okay, so I have this beautiful text here, and I want to put this on my website. So it's quite a challenge. This is not a downloadable font that we could get from Google Type. It's really not something we can get from Adobe Typekit. So how can we put this on the website? Well, of course, you can save it as an image and put it on your website, but the downfall of doing that is that it's going to not be scalable. You know, you can put on pixels and things like that, but they're not very scalable. So another option would be to save it as what we call an SVG, or scalable vector graphics. And what that does is it makes a nice vector image that I can put on a website, and it could be scalable. So if you don't know what an SVG is, and I know some of you are new to this whole digital media and this web design ideas, it's a way of putting text on, or putting a graphic onto your website using code or programming. Illustrator does a very good job of making an SVG for you, so that's why I went there. To do that, what I'm going to do is convert this not into a font anymore. I'm going to do what's called Create Outlines. What that does is it converts this font that I used into an object. To do that is underneath Type. So I selected it with the selection tool, so I selected it. And then I went under Type, and there's one underneath there called Create Outlines. What that'll do is create this into an object. And now once I do that, this is no longer type I can type anymore. There's no more text in there that I can type, but it is an object. Next, I'm going to shrink the artboard down to fit the size of the art, because right now if I save this as an SVG, it's going to save this giant white box that you see here. And all I want to do is just save the area that's for my text. So to shrink the artboard down to fit the size of the text, I'm going to go under Object, Artboards, Fit to Artwork Bounds, or Fit to Selected Art. Either one of these would work. It shrinks the artboard down to there. So now I'm ready to save this. So there's two ways I'm going to save this. One would be as if I'm going to save this for a web page. I might save it as what I call an SVG. And the other way is if I wanted to take this and put it into an app. Let's say I wanted to put this as the title of my app. I would save as a PDF. So those are the two ways that I would save. One would be for a website, the other one would be for an app. To save that, I would go under File, Save As, and of course, you could save the Illustrator file. I recommend saving the Illustrator file just for as a working file. So this is scruffy text. And so I'm going to save that just as an AI Illustrator, but I'm not going to use the AI. Well, I might use it in Photoshop, whatever. So there's an Illustrator file. Next would be for, like I said, a web page. Do that. I'm going to go under File, Save As, and this time change the format here to SVG, not the SVG compressed, the normal SVG. And let's just leave the same name, Scruffy Text SVG, and I'm going to hit Save. And I'm not going to go into the code or anything. You can view the code if you want. You can click on the SVG and it'll show you, hey, look at this. This is what it would look like in the code view for your web page. But you don't even have to do that. You could just call it, program it onto your website. So I'm just going to hit OK. And so that would be for a website. And then the last one would be for an app. So if I was going to program this for an app, I would save it as a PDF. So I'm going to go to File, Save As. And I'm going to change to PDF. Now there is one that says Adobe PDF in here, and it's okay. What I'm going to do is when I choose the Adobe PDF and I hit Save there, I'm going to turn off where it says Preserve Illustrator Editing Capabilities. That's going to make the file size smaller. Now you won't be able to open it back in Illustrator and make changes, but that's why we did the AI file. But this one is great. You can then send this and put it into app design software for an app. So I'm going to save that as well. I understand, and I saved that. So those are the 3 different formats you might save: Illustrator, SVG, and PDF, and why you would use each one. I'm going to pause this video in part 1, and then we'll start inside of Photoshop to make a flyer.